clearly not the start to the new year that the government will have wanted. Wes Streeting was saying he was ashamed about the state of A&E departments with so many declaring critical incidents, long A&E waits. I mean, does this happen every January, or is this year different?
Well, quite a lot.
There's a winter NHS crisis just about every year, isn't there? I mean, we seem to report it, but you can predict these things. It's going to be winter, it's going to be January, it's going to be bad weather, you don't know how much snow, it's going to be colder, it's going to be wetter, and that's why you have to prepare. And at the moment, the NHS is just at a breaking point. It's kind of beyond capacity, so it can't really cope when you get that excess demand, when you get people turning up with flu. And flu is serious. It's not somebody with a cough, feeling a little bit unwell. No. Should I go to work? Should I go to the pub or not? I mean, flu is a serious condition that can cost you your life.
We've got a situation again, haven't we, where you might be worried about calling an ambulance because you might be worried that the ambulance won't come in time or that the ambulance might come. And then Wes Streeting said yesterday in his interview on LBC, ambulances are taking patients to hospital to die because we don't have the treatment for them in hospitals. This is the Health Secretary speaking.
And a lot of the ambulances, again, have been stuck outside. They can't offload them. Part, again, of this problem is, we'll get back to what we've talked about earlier in the week about social care. There are too many people in hospital beds who need to be in community facilities, but there aren't any. Yeah. Because of this crisis in social care.
There's a more pressing problem, I think. I understand that there is a long-term problem, but there is a more pressing problem that hospitals don't have capacity. No. They don't have enough space for all the patients, and they don't have enough staff. I mean, that is an immediate problem
Beds and
that
staff.
You can fix.
Yeah. It's not, but it's not. It's an immediate problem you can start fixing, but you can't fix it immediately because you can't just magic up a whole load more nurses, doctors, porters, ambulance crews, other specialists, everybody. You just can't do it.
So we have situations. We have situations, and people are getting viewers. I did ask viewers earlier. Let us know what your personal situation is. We've had this anonymous email. My 91-year-old father had a fall before Christmas. A consultant at York Hospital A&E informed us there was currently a 64-hour wait. Almost 3 days in his department, and asked us whether he was ill enough to be waiting in A&E. Luckily, it wasn't a major fall. My sister is a nurse, so she made the decision not to take him and assessed him herself. She said he would be safer staying at home than waiting in A&E. And not all of us, of course, lucky enough to have a nurse in the family.
But also, what a terrible indictment that it's safer to be at home. Yeah. You're 91 and you've had a fall. You'd think the obvious place to be is in hospital where you can be observed by the experts.
This all starts from the fact that we have 7.5 million people waiting for ordinary treatment. And in normal times, if you're running a hospital, you'd have some empty beds so that if you have a surge of flu cases, you've got some capacity. But, of course, what's going on is every bed is being used to try and get those waiting lists down. So, and I mean, it must be the case, surely. If you go to A&E and you have a gaping, bleeding wound, they're going to see you immediately. If you are kind of, having a cardiac arrest, they'll see you immediately. The problem is the people who arrive, who can't see a GP, who are feeling unwell, who are not, they're going to be at the top of the queue. That triage when you arrive says, well, look, we've got emergency cases, so I'm really sorry, we'll get to you in a bit. And in a bit could be an hour or 3 hours or 12 hours or 24 hours.
Or 64 hours.
And in those cases, maybe the rational thing to do is
stay at home.
It is the rational thing to do there, but it's damning that it is.
Exactly.
Okay,
and that you can't get straight in, but
it's shameful.
We've had a tweet to precisely this point. On New Year's Eve, Yorkshire Bird says, my brother was found dead in his home. I send our condolences to you. 2 days previously, after waiting 17 hours for an ambulance, he received a call asking if he still needed one. He said no. He didn't feel that he was an emergency case. People are triaging themselves and not having the expertise to decide if they're at risk.
What extraordinary to call that is to someone say, do you still need an ambulance? I mean, for God's sake.
Well, the reason they do that is you do get some people, and you see the reports every year they put out, who call for an ambulance unnecessarily. It's a minority, And this case sounds like they did need medical help.
Well, also, you have people who call an ambulance out necessarily.
Yes,
but then might feel better.
Yeah. But the reason... if you ring 999 and ask for an ambulance, they will begin asking you some questions. And you will see the report later on. You will get some people who are drunk or they've had a bee sting or whatever, and they don't need an ambulance. And you've got to take those people out of the system. Now, this patient, again, condolences to the family, sounds like they needed an ambulance. The ambulance service is at breaking point now. West Streeting has inherited an NHS that performs miracles, treats more people than ever, but is failing because people aren't being treated quick enough, and there's too many people on waiting lists. But it's better to be honest, though, and say, I'm ashamed. I'm the health secretary, responsible overall across the UK, but it's devolved in Northern Ireland Health and Wales and Scotland, primarily England. To be honest about the service you're delivering is not adequate.
He was honest about two things over the weekend. You know, it's really important for us to say, if you are in trouble, you should go to A&E. The idea that anybody should be not going to A&E at the moment because of these long waits, if it's serious, they will see you immediately. I think West Streeting is right to talk about shame. He also, though, said on Friday, it's going to be a cold weekend. He said, turn up the heating. And there'll be lots of people at the moment thinking, well...
They can't afford to.
Well, I thought
Thanks
immediately...
to his government taking away the winter fuel allowance.
I thought
that was an incredibly tin-eared thing to say. He also said, wrap up warm. OK, fair enough, but turn up the heating.
It's the official health advice.
Yeah, turn up the heating. There are people watching this programme who can't afford to put the heating on because they're going to have to make that choice. Age UK have said so between heating and eating. And look, we're getting into a really, really...
Not going to A&E because I'm worried about the NHS.
Exactly.
Not turning up the heating because I'm worried about my fuel bills.
Because I can't pay the bills.
These are two kind of terrible decisions.
He's not responsible for the long waits at NHS. He's inherited them.
He's got to have a winter fuel allowance.
Exactly. He's got to have a plan to change that. But he voted to take away up to £300 from pensioners. And that's, you can't escape it. It'll cast a long shadow. There will be people who will die this year because of that. And there was... When the Tories were said to be threatening to take it away, Labour said more than 4,000 excess deaths, because you can statistically calculate the impact of benefit and income changes. And during the austerity years of Cameron and Osborne and Nick Clegg, who went on to make a fortune at Facebook, report after report were coming out from academics showing excess deaths in their tens of thousands from the benefit cuts they are making. And these are people all dying individually around the country without great fanfare. But afterwards, you can find out. Well, you can see the change of your financial interactions.
And that winter fuel allowance survived 6 Chancellors of the Exchequers and was abolished by the first Chancellor of the Exchequer, Labour, for 14 years. Astonishing.
It was cruel. It was a cruel move.
It won't go anywhere to making up for the lack of winter fuel allowance, but cold weather payments have been triggered in some areas. Some people in England, Wales and Northern Ireland are entitled to this particular payment where there is a prolonged period of below zero temperatures. In Scotland, those on low incomes and benefits may receive a separate winter heating payment. That doesn't depend on how low the temperature falls. But you have to have 7 days of 0 degrees Celsius or less, and it is £25 for the 7-day period.
But the people entitled to the cold weather payments are the people who are also still entitled to the winter fuel allowance, people who are entitled to pension credit, and the people who are on those low incomes just above the threshold,
which is around £12,500,
are the ones who don't get the cold weather payments and are losing the winter allowance. And the nature of government is, in opposition you say things. In government, when you do things, you deal with the consequences for days, weeks, months, years afterwards, and we will find out what's happened to excess deaths over the course of the coming months, and that will be the question.
And there will be some. Probably thousands. 25
quid probably covers 2 days of your heating or something. It's probably, I can see my smart meter ticking round. I wish I hadn't got one. But
it certainly means you turn it on earlier than you otherwise would when it's cold in the evening, and that's a good thing.
I'm distracted by the case studies coming in from our wonderful viewers who always keep us in touch in the moment with what is happening. My mum had a heart problem, says this email, waited 28 hours in resus for a bed on a cardiac unit. We stayed with her in resus as she's got Alzheimer's and had no one to keep her safe. And then when she did get the ward, we were told we had to leave and we weren't able to stay with her even overnight, even though she was in incredible distress. Now, that sounds shocking. And as I understand it from recent experience, if you do have a need in hospital, actually, nurses sometimes encourage you to have a carer or somebody stay with you.
Yeah.
So that I'm sorry that that's happened to you, because I understood that the policy was that if you had a special need like Alzheimer's, that you could have someone stay with you.
Well, my mum has dementia.
Yeah.
She had a fall on Christmas Day. She ended up in A&E on Christmas Day, had a lot of stitches.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
She was treated immediately that night in hospital for 2 days. Her carer stayed with her, and the NHS was absolutely brilliant. And she had to go to A&E. She was treated within an hour.
Yes.
And so it is the case that in many parts of the country, every day, the NHS is doing brilliant things, but there are also stories which we're hearing which are not great things.
I'd have thought it was in the interest of the NHS to keep the carer with somebody
I
like
think
Alzheimer's.
Something has gone wrong in that particular
the issue
case,
is
clearly.
whether you have a carer who can go with you. And my mum from her care home had a carer who would stay in the evening, come back at 7 in the morning, but she had 3 nights in.
Well, it relieves the pressure on the nursing staff.
We were worried there wouldn't be a bed, but actually it was OK.
It is important to remember, to keep it in context, that terrific work is done. People are getting a first-class service. We don't want to demoralise everybody in the NHS, and Streeton's got that problem where you point out
Kevin,
where
I've
it's
spoken
failing.
to people in the NHS who are themselves demoralised.
I know.
They are also saying, please raise attention
I've got health
to
workers
what
in the
is happening
family.
in A&E.
I don't need to, I know it.
Exactly.
I know it, Susanna.
So we all know we are not down on individual NHS workers.
But it is important for everybody to recognise it when we discuss it. And also, as I was going to point out, it's important for Streeting, when you're highlighting the mistakes and saying the failings and you're ashamed, at the same time, to praise those who are going to work and doing an amazing job for us at the same time. But you've got to point out the mistakes. My mum's came in,
I think, in 15 minutes, and she was in hospital. It was brilliant.
But it needs to be
Christmas Day.
But it needs to be the best all the time. And
for every individual.
Exactly. And these case studies are highlighting the real lives behind the statistics. When you see 7.5 million people waiting for operations, when you hear about these long waits, they are people. This is flesh and blood that is suffering.
Honestly, I'm just reading case after case after case, and it's demoralising.
And on the political level, of course, the government will say they inherited an NHS which was in crisis. That they may wear that this year. It won't wash next year.
We talked about this yesterday. In the end, for this government, the NHS has to be better in 2-3 years' time. And if it's not, they are in huge trouble. The same on the economy. The economy's got to be growing. People have got to feel better off. They can't be judged now. What they can be judged on is whether what they're doing now is going to make a difference.
It any better.
But it doesn't deal with the terrible situations that many of our viewers are dealing with right now.
Well, that's why you elect a new government. You want it better on the economy, you want better public services, NHS, yes, you want to see improvements in education, transport, the criminal justice system, the environment too. You want to see all this improvement. And Labour, in particular, it makes the NHS, sometimes it's the top of people's priorities, sometimes it's second after living
it's never
standards. No, and if they don't deliver, they'll deserve to be judged incredibly harshly by voters, who will then have to say, would another lot do better?
That's right.
Your main story this morning, Kevin, in Daily Mirror, is about McDonald's. And more than a year ago, McDonald's, the fast food chain, vowed to tackle claims of sex abuse and harassment. At least 700 current and former employees are taking legal action, which includes accusations that a manager offered a worker extra shifts in exchange for sex.
Sex for shifts.
What's going on at McDonald's? Also discrimination, homophobia, racism. Staff allege bosses asking youngsters how many people they'd slept with or even groped them. Around 90% are on 0-hour contracts and believe that their position makes them vulnerable.
It does, because if you're on a 0-hour contract, you have no guaranteed shifts, you have no guaranteed pay, and it makes you particularly vulnerable to predatory bosses.
What's the truth, Kevin? Because the boss of McDonald's yesterday, he was at the Select Committee in Parliament, he was saying that they've removed 29 employees for abuse in the workplace. He said that every employee can choose a guaranteed hours contract, but lots of them prefer to be on a 0 hours contract. That's what he said. But your report in the Mirror suggests the opposite.
I'd be surprised. I've heard this from other employers.
He's the boss, and it's what he said.
I know, but
well, he would.
How was it present, right? Your boss who's saying, right, you've got to give sex for shifts, says, what type of contract do you want? There's a reality sitting in a corporate gleaming HQ on a big fat cat salary, and then there's a reality of what's happening on the ground in 1,400 restaurants. And I think I can see why he says that, but look, these contracts need banning. Exploitative 0 hours contracts need banning. Labour is going to ban
contracts, but some people prefer them, Kevin.
Yeah. You can get cases. You might say
students, people want to work part time.
Yeah, that's true.
They like freedom and flexibility.
But most people want a guaranteed shift. If you're a student, I've kids who are students and they all work. They're all grafters. And they wanted to know you were going to work in a coffee chain, I won't name it, but on a Thursday night. You don't want to be sitting waiting, can you come in, in an hour's time? You want to know. You want to be able to plan your life.
Whether you've got a job that day. Wow. Yeah. But the legislation is going to give a choice. McDonald's say they've got the choice. Your report suggests they haven't got a choice.
No, I don't. The people who are taking the legal action did not feel they had a choice.
Meanwhile, McDonald's said it did not recognise the claim a manager asked for sex in return for shifts, but they added if provided with sufficient information will ensure a full investigation is carried out.
Extraordinary.
It's
an imbalance at work, though, isn't it? You've got powerful employers and you've got employees with very few rights who are incredibly...
The other big issue this morning is education. The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, will be with us at 8:30. Big issues in schools, do you think? What are they? The VAT increase or the VAT imposition on private school fees, or the fact that home education is not going to be an automatic right?
And also they
parents?
want to change academies, which currently can set their own wages, they can set their own curriculum, choose their own uniform. The suggestion is that this bill that's going through Parliament will strip all those freedoms away and make all schools the same. Now, this is extraordinary if the Labour government are going to do this, because academies were pioneered by Tony Blair, of all people, who liked the freedom. And the Tories would say, in England in particular, educational standards under the academies were rising. And in Scotland and Wales, falling.
The VAT on the fee paying 7% will fund breakfast clubs and extra teachers.
Well, apparently, there's a report last week saying it's not ring-fenced for education at all.
But the legislation is legislating for breakfast clubs in all schools. I think that's in the bill.
Which you can see the government calculates is worth £450 a year to a family. Those numbers are almost a bit...
Just a second. She did say, the Education Secretary, every penny of the £1.4 billion raised by the VAT hike would go into state schools. There were reports last week which have not been denied that the Treasury is saying that isn't the case.
So it won't be ring-fenced?
There might be the money for the breakfast clubs, but she said on at least 4 occasions since she became Education Secretary, it will all go to the states. You've got to really push her on that. Is that still the case?
The education budget is increasing by No,
we're talking, Kevin, about the money from the VAT hike.
Except the IFS said that costs are going to outpace funding for 25-26.
Yeah, that is an ongoing problem because you have huge pressures because teachers want to be paid.
Well,
you get that cost of buildings, heating is going up in
whether
schools
that money
now.
From the VAT is going
how are they going to get extra teachers?
Education spending per pupil.
You're ignoring that point.
Education spending. No, because you're going up a cul-de-sac.
She said, no, it's not a cul-de-sac. She said it 4 times. Every penny from the hike in VAT on private schools will be put into state education.
And
now there is a suggestion. The Treasury are now saying That isn't the case.
Well, the point is, what would the budget have been if you hadn't had the VAT?
Where's that money going to go?
It's going
to disappear into something called the so-called black hole.
Yeah.
1.4 billion comes into the Treasury, and more than 1.4 billion extra goes out in education.
I think this is another
spending.
flipping lion U-turn by this shower.
OK. Well,
yeah, but that's just your
there
default
we have to leave
setting.
it, I'm afraid.
Well, no.